a little less than 3 years ago, Meredith had an amazing opportunity to travel with other young Jewish professionals to Rwanda as part of a JDC and Twine trip. I can't speak about her experience from the Bima this morning and do it any justice, so you'll have to find her after services and talk to her if you'd like to hear a little bit more. But I can share one powerful image that I know has had a profound effect on her and on me as well. It might not seem like much, especially in the context of what that country has been through. But in the Genocide Museum of Kigali, amongst the horrors of personal stories, blood-stained clothes, and hundreds of thousands of photos of Tutsi victims, was a quote from one of the survivors, a survivor named Apollon Kabahizi. It's a short quote, but nestled there within a few words is a painfully honest question that demands an answer from all of us. And the quote read like this: "When everyone said never again after the Holocaust, was it meant for some people and not for others?" Now, there are different ways to read this quote, for sure. It can be angry, it can be accusatory, but I think more than anything, I see it as a quote of hopelessness, of looking at a world that has pledged to stand up to hatred and bigotry, to fear and violence, and saying, did you mean it? Did you ever really mean it? Now, it's hard to face that question. And it's hard to face that question because we might not like the answer. We might have one idea in our hearts, and we might cleave to that idea with every bit of hope and compassion we have. But if our answer is yes, we meant it, then we have to find a way to make sense of a lot of things. We have to find a way to make sense of Cambodia, of Rwanda, of Bosnia, Chechnya, Darfur, Burundi, and the Congo. We have to defend ourselves against the slaughter that is taking place as we speak of the Rohingya in Myanmar and the Yazidi in Iraq and Syria, and the detainment of 1.5 million Muslims in so-called re-education camps in China as we speak. And we have to find a way to explain how in 2018 Jews in Pittsburgh can be murdered in their synagogue simply for being Jewish, and only 5 months later, Muslims in New Zealand can suffer the exact same fate. I know that this isn't the sermon that any of us want to hear. It's not the sermon I want to give. But there is no irony lost on me that today we honor a special Shabbat called Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat of Remembrance. A Shabbat that gives us a very specific commandment to the Jewish people to eradicate from this earth an idea called Amalek. An idea that sits at the very core of what we understand to be hatred, ruthlessness, indifference, and senseless violence. That takes the form of an ancient people that, strangely enough, we can't actually seem to identify. And that's why this Shabbat is so important. That's why this commandment, that's why this mitzvah is so important. Because today we stand up in our synagogue to hear a mitzvah that is so much harder to define than all the others. The name of this lost tribe of Amalek is not found in any archaeological records. It's not found in Egyptian hieroglyphs or Akkadian etchings. And the great majority of historians believe that this ancient people never existed at all. But our Torah talks about this people as if they are a consistent presence in our lives, as if it were impossible to walk through this world without crossing paths with Amalek along the way. And because of this, I think our Torah is asking us to look at Amalek a little bit differently than what we might see on the surface. And instead is challenging us to see Amalek, those moments of darkness, of bigotry, of hatred, of apathy that exist within us. I'm not accusing any of us of being killers or chas v'chalila of being propagators of racism or xenophobia, but as the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught, few are guilty, but all are responsible. We may not be guilty of the horrendous acts of hatred that we have seen growing in this country and around the world, but we have a responsibility. We have a call, a mitzvah, to recognize how our own prejudices, our own fears, our own judgments, our own versions of Amalek might keep us from speaking up for those who are being targeted, ourselves included. Last week, Rabbi Starr reminded us that we cannot sit idly by when injustice is taking place. That when a congresswoman uses a tired and old anti-Semitic trope, that we have to speak up. That we have to write letters, we have to make phone calls, we have to get out our cardboard signs, and we need to head to the streets. And that for our non-Jewish family, we have the exact same chiyuv, the exact same obligation. That when we hear homophobic slurs, when we catch the end of a racist joke, or when we hear a blanket statement about an entire group of people based on their faith, their philosophy, or the color of their skin, that we have an obligation to stand up and fight for the dignity and sanctity of life that comes in a full palette of hues and expressions. And when, lahavdil, we find ourselves making those jokes, using those slurs, or making those judgments, then we have to remember this day, this moment of Zachor. Because, my friends, when we were at Sinai, we made a promise to God that we would fight Amalek wherever he may be. And God said back to us, be strong, be courageous, and be resilient, because where you'll find him more often than not is within yourself. We, as Jews, have been saying never again for thousands of years. And throughout history, it is us, the Jewish people, who have fought with every bit of strength left in our tired bones to stand up for those who find themselves crushed by the pressing boots of intolerance and hatred. Today, on the Shabbat of Zachor, we are reminded that the work isn't done. We've got a lot more work to do. And that we owe it to ourselves, to the families affected by the cowardly massacre in New Zealand, and to the victims of hatred and bigotry everywhere, that when we say never again, we mean never again, period. No standing still. No waiting anxiously for whatever happens next. Let's fulfill our promise. Let's fill this world with light and with love, and let's crush Amalek wherever he may be. And let's start turning this upside-down world right side up. Shabbat Shalom.